Bran the Builder, who also goes by Bran, is the supposed founder of House Stark, and it is said that he lived during the Age of Heroes, which was an era of Westerosi history before the arrival of the Andals, making him one of the first men. It is believed by many that Bran is the son of Brandon of the Bloody Blade, who is known for driving giants away from the Reach and warring against the Children of the Forest. Legends claim that Bran the Builder is to be credited for building the wall after the Long Night, and he apparently received assistance from the Children of the Forest with building the wall, and while doing so, it is said that he learned the true tongue in the process, which is the language that the children speak. It is believed that the children used magic to help with constructing the wall, and giants also helped with moving the huge blocks of ice. Bran is also said to have created Winterfell, and the giants apparently helped with building this too. Brandon's gift, which is also known as the Gift, is an area of land that stretches 50 leagues south from the wall, given specifically to the Night's Watch to support and aid the Watch, and this piece of land is under protection of both the Watch and Winterfell. It is said that Bran was the person who gave the Watch this land, although that is not confirmed, as some maesters argue that this was the work of another Brandon of House Stark. There are also some stories that Bran was commissioned to design the stone high tower at Old Town, but others claim this was actually done by Bran's son, who was also named Brandon. Whether Bran actually did a lot of the things some people claim he did or not, he was no doubt a very important figure in the past, and thanks to him, the legendary House Stark came into existence. King Theon Stark, who was also known as the Hungry Wolf, as he received this name due to the constant state of war that the North was in during his reign, was a powerful ruler of Winterfell. Theon defended the North during the arrival of the Andals, and with the aid of House Bolton, he was able to defeat the Andal warlord, known as Argos 7-Star, in the Battle of the Weeping Water. After this battle, Theon then raised his own fleet and sailed across the narrow sea to the coast of Andalos, with Argos' body displayed on the front of his ship. When arriving at Andalos, Theon burned multiple Andal villages and killed hundreds of people, resulting in him capturing 3 houses and a fortified sept. Theon also displayed spiked heads of the victims along the coastline to deter any potential invaders. He later conquered the Three Sisters, which is a group of 3 islands located in the Bight, and he is most likely the person to be credited for the War Across the Water, which was a war between House Arryn and House Stark fighting over these 3 islands. At a later point in his life, he also defeated rebels from the Rills, which is an area of land located in the north, and he aided the Night's Watch in a generational defeat on the wildlings who lived beyond the wall. At another point, the Ironborn conquered the Stony Shore, wreaking havoc in the process, and Theon managed to put a stop to them, resulting in a lot of them dying, and ultimately sending them away. Speaking of the Ironborn, Theon Greyjoy was actually named after King Theon, as he was no doubt someone to be respected in the eyes of the Ironborn for how much of a warrior he was. King Theon's remains are within the crypts of Winterfell, and the statue that depicts him shows him as a thin man with long hair and a beard. King Torrhen Stark, who is known as the King Who Knelt, was the last king of the North until the arrival of Aegon the Conqueror. After the Riverlands and Storm's End had fallen to Aegon, Torrhen called his banners and marched an army of 30,000 men down to face him, but when Torrhen finally came into contact with Aegon, who had 45,000 men and 3 dragons, he came to the realization that he and his men would fall just like every other house that have tried to face Aegon so far. Although it was a hard choice to make, especially because many lords were urging him to attack, he ultimately decided to bend the knee to Aegon, swearing fealty to him. Because of his surrender, Aegon named him the Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, and although many did not like that Torrhen did this at the time, he became appreciated more and more as time went on, with most Northerners realizing that he is the reason that they are all alive. Torrhen's sons also did not agree with the rule of House Targaryen, with some speaking of starting a rebellion, but that ultimately never happened. Lord Torrhen was now trusted with many matters after House Targaryen took over, such as helping with ending certain rebellions and also sending men to help Aegon when needed. After Torrhen's death, he was buried in the crypts of Winterfell, and overall, most people view him as a good and legendary ruler. Lord Cregan Stark, who is also known as the Wolf of the North, and later in life the Old Man of the North, was the head of House Stark during the events of House of the Dragon. To avoid spoiling myself for the future seasons of the show, I am not going to discuss what happens to him during the events of season 3 and/or 4. Anyways, he was born as the eldest son of Rickon Stark and Gillian Glover, and he later had a younger brother who unfortunately passed away not long after his birth, as well as a bastard half-sister who was known as Sarah Snow. At the age of 13, Cregan succeeded his father after he passed away, with his uncle Bernard ruling the North as regent until Cregan became 16. Relations between him and his uncle were pretty tense, with his uncle not seeming willing to relinquish his power when Cregan finally came of age, and eventually, Bernard and his 3 sons were imprisoned because of his actions. After Cregan officially took over, he married Lady Ara Nori, but unfortunately, she died while giving birth to a son, with Cregan naming his new son Rickon after his late father. At this point in time, House Stark distanced themselves from royal politics for over a century, but when Cregan was approached by Jacaerys Valerion, who is Rhaenyra Targaryen's son, with the goal of gaining support from House Stark, Cregan ultimately agreed to join Rhaenyra's side. Cregan got along with Jacaerys as he reminded him of his late young brother, and after spending time with him through drinking, hunting, and training, he simply couldn't say no. The agreement for Cregan to aid Rhaenyra was made under one condition, prediction, that being Jacaerys' firstborn daughter will at some point marry Cregan's son. From the little that I know, it seems like Cregan proves himself to be a legend in the coming war, and he eventually grows old, outliving his eldest son. Cregan had 3 spouses and 10 children during his time, and overall, he is viewed as a legendary Stark who accomplished many great things. Artos Stark, who is also known as Artos the Implacable, was the 3rd son of Lord Baron Stark and Lady Laura Royce. Lord Baron was a grandson of Lord Cregan, which means Artos would be Cregan's great-grandson. There isn't much known about Artos, but it is said that he was the most fearsome warrior of his time. When the king beyond the wall, Raymond Redbeard, went over the wall, Lord William Stark called his banners and marched north, and Artos was among those who went with him, and during the battle at Long Lake, William was killed. Artos managed to defeat Raymond during this battle, ending the wildling threat, and when the Night's Watch arrived to help, they realized that they were too late as the battle was already over. Artos then demanded that they dispose of the dead due to them being so late. William, who died at the battle at Long Lake, was Artos' older brother, and he had 2 children, one being a son known as Edwyle, and Edwyle had a son named Rickard, who was Eddard Stark's father, making Artos the great-uncle of Lord Rickard. Artos was such a legend during his time that he received a statue in the crypts of Winterfell, even though he was never a lord. Lord Rickard Stark was the only child of Lord Edwyle and Lady Marna Locke, and eventually he would marry his cousin, Lyanna Stark. Together, they had 4 children known as Brandon, Eddard, Lyanna, and Benjen, and Lord Rickard was overall very ambitious, at one point visiting King's Landing with the goal of having King Aerys, who was known as the Mad King, to consider building another wall and claiming more land in the far north. He also negotiated the marriage between his heir Brandon to Catelyn Tully, as well as his daughter Lyanna to Lord Robert Baratheon. As we all know, news of Lyanna's abduction at the hands of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen spread around, and the Mad King summoned Lord Rickard to King's Landing to answer for his son Brandon, who acted out after this news came about. Rickard demanded a trial by combat, which was granted by the king, and when brought to the throne room, the Mad King declared that fire was the champion of House Targaryen. A fire was lit beneath Rickard by pyromancers, and he was slowly cooked to death. Brandon was also killed here as well, which resulted in Rickard's second son, Eddard, now being named the Lord of Winterfell. Brandon Stark was taller than his younger brother Eddard, and Catelyn Tully found him more handsome. In addition to that, he was also much wilder, and overall nowhere near as stoic as Eddard, being hot-blooded, and Eddard believes this is part of the reason why he died so early. With that being said, Brandon was a better swordsman than his younger brothers, and he also loved horse riding. Brandon was not shy when discussing whatever he wanted, and that included women, with George R. R. Martin claiming that he might have even had some bastards in various places that he visited. During the tourney at Harrenhal, Brandon competed here, but was unhorsed by Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, resulting in Rhaegar to eventually win the tournament and giving Lyanna his flowers. Brandon attempted to confront Rhaegar after this, as he viewed it as disrespectful since Lyanna was already to be wedded to Robert Baratheon, but Brandon was restrained by others from doing so. Not long after this, Brandon arrived at Riverrun, meeting with Catelyn, but he was challenged to a duel by Peter Baelish, who was deeply in love with her. Brandon suited up for the duel, but when he arrived and saw the smaller Peter was only wearing a helmet and a breastplate, Brandon took off most of his armor. He was of course much better at fighting than Peter, and he offered Peter several chances to yield during their battle, but Peter kept refusing. Brandon ended the duel by injuring Peter severely, and later departed from Riverrun, promising Catelyn he would return to her soon so they could get married. While Brandon was leaving, he received word that his sister Lyanna has been abducted, and he, alongside his companions, rode to King's Landing immediately. As he entered the Red Keep, he shouted for Rhaegar to face him, and he found out Rhaegar was not present, as he was arrested by the Mad King and charged with plotting Rhaegar's murder. When Lord Rickard arrived and was burned to death, Brandon was forced to watch, with his hands chained behind his back, although his legs were left free. His sword was placed in front of him, but just barely out of his reach, and as he watched his father burn, he kept trying to reach for his sword, strangling himself in the process, and eventually he died here as well. Brandon was only 20 years old, and the companions he rode here with were also executed as well. He was buried in the crypts of Winterfell even though he wasn't a lord, as Eddard loved him very much. Lord Eddard Stark, who also goes by Ned, is a very honorable man, keeping faith with the old gods and being very protective of his loved ones, in which he cherishes every member of his family deeply. Although everyone close to Ned finds him kind, there are many who view his reserved personality as a sign of coldness. From the age of 8, Ned was fostered by Lord Jon Arryn at the Eyrie, and there he befriended Robert Baratheon, with Jon becoming a second father to him. At the age of 16, Ned divided his time between Winterfell and the Eyrie, and during one of his visits to Winterfell, it was he that brought the wedding proposal for Robert to be wedded to Lyanna. During the tourney at Harrenhal, Ned, who was now 18, attended and met Ashara Dane, and he danced with her that night, showcasing an interest in her. Ned was also present when Prince Rhaegar gave his flowers to Lyanna, and he remembered this as the moment when all smiles died. While at the Eyrie, Ned's father and brother were both executed, and the Mad King demanded Jon Arryn to send him the heads of both Ned and Robert. Jon of course refused, which started Robert's rebellion, and Ned joined it as the new Lord of Winterfell. He called his banners, and arrived to Lord Hoster Tully in time to help him with the Battle of the Bells, and afterwards, he arrived at Riverrun to marry Hoster's daughter, Catelyn. At the Battle of the trident, the rebels won, with Robert killing Prince Rhaegar, but Robert was wounded by him, resulting in Ned being the one to pursue the rest of the Mad King's army to King's Landing. When Ned arrived at the capital, he found out that Lord Tywin Lannister had already sacked the city, and here he developed negative feelings towards House Lannister, especially after he found out that they brutally killed Prince Rhaegar's wife. As Ned rode into the throne room to claim the crown for Robert, he found the Mad King's dead body at the steps of the Iron Throne, with Jaime Lannister sitting on it. Ned believed that the sack of King's Landing dishonored Robert's cause, and he was very disappointed that Robert did not feel the same. Ned also believed that Jaime should be made to join the Night's Watch for breaking his oath, but was very upset to hear that Robert didn't agree, and this created a rift between the two. Ned ended up leaving King's Landing and traveled to the Red Mountains of Dorne to rescue his sister Lyanna, finding it to be guarded by 3 members of the Kingsguard, one of them being Sir Arthur Dayne. Ned and one of his companions were successful in the duel that happened here, and when he found Lyanna, she was already dying. In the show, it is revealed that this is where Jon Snow was born, in which Ned took him and promised Lyanna that he would raise him as one of his own. When Ned returned to Winterfell, he arrived with Jon, and this hurt the relationship that he had with his wife Catelyn, who had already given birth to their son Robb. Ned refused to speak to her about Jon's mother, and rumors spread that the mother was Ashara Dayne, the woman who he had danced with at the tourney of Harrenhal. Catelyn confronted him on this, in which Ned did not want to discuss it anymore, resulting in her not bringing it up ever again. Ned buried the remains of his family members in the crypt of Winterfell, breaking the tradition of only Stark kings and lords having statues. Of course, we all know what happens to Ned in the main series, and although he wasn't in the story for very long, he is no doubt one of the most beloved characters in this entire franchise. Lyanna Stark was a slim lady, and according to Ned, his daughter Arya resembles her appearance, with others claiming that Marjorie Tyrell resembles her as well. Many described her as a wild girl, comparing her to a tomboy, and if she could have, she probably would have carried a sword. Robert Baratheon became deeply infatuated with Lyanna, and even 15 years after her death, still has a major impact on him emotionally. Although Robert was very in love with her, Lyanna didn't seem to be as enthusiastic about wedding him, believing that Robert would have no doubt been unfaithful in their marriage. Lyanna also loved horse riding, in which she was very good at it, and she was also very fond of flowers. At the tourney of Harrenhal, she found a boy, Howland Reed, being bullied by 3 others, in which she chased them off, attacking them with a tourney sword. She ended up introducing the boys to her siblings, and he eventually would become lifelong friends with Ned. When Rhaegar eventually won the tourney and placed his flowers on Lyanna's lap, Robert was of course outraged by this, resulting in him feeling very resentful of Rhaegar. 1 year later, Lyanna was taken by Rhaegar, and in the show, it is revealed that they were in love with each other, getting married in secret, and she birthed his child, who goes by the name Jon Snow. In the books, it is still a mystery what actually happened to Lyanna, but I believe what we saw in the show regarding her and Jon Snow, for the most part, is what will unfold in the books. When Lyanna passed away, she was only 16 years old, and she was buried alongside her brother and father in the crypts of Winterfell. Benjen Stark, who also goes by Ben, is an observant man who enjoys summer wine. At the tourney of Harrenhal, a brother of the Night's Watch spoke up during a feast, with the goal of trying to convince some people gathered there to join the Night's Watch, and this is where Ben became more interested in joining it. During Robert's rebellion, Ben was the only Stark in Winterfell, and a few months after Ned returned, he joined the Night's Watch, although his reasons for joining are unknown. With his skills, he became a ranger and quickly rose to the position of First Ranger, which is a senior and commanding officer of the Rangers. The King Beyond the Walls, Mance Rayder, considers Ben to be the bane of the wildlings' existence. Over the years, Ben visited Winterfell on several occasions, and during one of these visits, he speaks to Jon about him wanting to join the Watch. Ned ends up approving of this, and Jon eventually heads north to the Wall with Ben. Shortly after they arrive, Ben is given the task to go beyond the wall to find a ranger who has not yet returned, and in the books, this is the last time we see him. In the TV series, he comes back in season 6, aiding Bran as he is about to be attacked by White Walkers, and he informs Bran that he is now partly dead, and due to the spells carved into the wall, he is not able to pass through it, and his goal now is to fight for the living as long as he can. We also see him help Jon as he is about to be killed by White Walkers as well, and as Jon makes his escape, Ben ultimately dies from the White Walkers he is fighting. I hope that if and when he does return in the books, they are able to do it better than what we saw in the show, as his return was pretty underwhelming. With that being said, he is a strong individual, and is a likely successor to become the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Robb Stark is the eldest son of Lord Eddard Stark and Catelyn Tully, and he is known as the Young Wolf. In the books, he starts off as being 14 years old, with his appearance favoring his Tully side. He was conceived on his parents' wedding night, with Catelyn staying at Riverrun, while Ned rode south to fight in the rebellion, and near the end of the war, she ended up giving birth to him. After the war ended, she traveled with him to Winterfell, and he was raised there, becoming very close to his half-brother Jon. They trained together at arms since they could walk, and after the Greyjoys' rebellion, Theon was brought to Winterfell as a hostage. Rather than treating him harshly, Robb befriended him, and Theon would join them with training at arms as well. Robb is very fast and strong, being more muscular than Jon, and he takes after his father, having a sense of justice and honor, and also being very caring to his family and loved ones. Although he is young, he forces himself to act more like a lord and takes on responsibility whenever needed. He is a follower of the old gods, and is frequently accompanied by his direwolf, Greywind. In the TV series, Robb falls in love love with Talisa and marries her, but in the books, she's a completely different character, going by the name Janie Westerling. He also didn't marry her out of love in the books, but rather, after he got wounded in battle, he was informed that Bran and Rickon were killed by Theon, and he ended up laying with her out of grief, which resulted in her becoming pregnant. Rather than leaving her, he decided to marry her instead, and that means in the show, he was definitely more selfish and without a doubt to be blamed for the Red Wedding, but in the books, it is a lot more of a complicated matter. With that being said, he is still a beloved character in both the show and books, and he's no doubt one of my favorite Starks. Sansa Stark is the eldest daughter of Lady Catelyn and Lord Eddard, and she is described as being traditionally beautiful, taking after her mother's family with her physical appearance. She was born at Winterfell and is tutored by Septa Mordain in the traditional womanly activities. She is also educated by Maester Luwin alongside her siblings. At the start of the books, she is 11 years old, and as she has grown, she is described as being tall, graceful, and womanly. Sansa has an interest in music, poetry, singing, dancing, embroidery, and other traditional feminine activities. And like many girls her age, she is in love with songs and stories of romance and adventure, particularly ones that depict handsome princes, honorable knights, and love. She keeps faith with both the old gods and the new, and her relationship with her sister Arya is not very strong, as they are polar opposites from one another. She is given a direwolf in which she is named Lady, and she loves the idea of going to King's Landing and one day becoming the queen. In the books, Sansa is more naive and idealistic, whereas in the show, she is a lot more cynical. Overall, she is much more innocent in the books for a longer period of time, and she grows into a more calculated character at a slower pace, unlike in the shows where that happens relatively quickly. With that being said, although she is a controversial character, most people come to really like her towards the later half of the story, myself included. Arya Stark is the third child of Lord Eddard and Lady Catelyn, and sometimes, like her siblings, she dreams that she is a direwolf. Her own direwolf's name is Nymeria, named after the legendary Rhoynar warrior queen. She was born and raised in Winterfell, only leaving it on a couple of occasions, and like her sister, she is tutored by Septa Mordain. At the start of the books, she is 9 years old, and her physical appearance is more Stark than Tully, in which she has a pretty long face. She is skinny and athletic, and Sansa, as well as some of the other girls at Winterfell, bully Arya, often calling her horseface. She is sometimes mistaken as a boy, although certain characters have described her as being very pretty, with Ned claiming she looks like his beautiful sister Lyanna, and many also claim that Arya takes after Lyanna's fiery personality. Arya is a spirited girl with interests such as fighting and exploration. She wants to learn how to fight with a sword, and she is very close with her half-brother Jon, who encourages her to learn how to fight. Arya is left-handed and quick, and she excels at mathematics and horseback riding. When comparing her character from the show and books, they are actually quite alike. With that being said, there are some differences, as she goes through much more trauma in the books, which is why her decision to join the Faceless Men in the books is a lot more understanding, as it seems like her only option. Arya is one of the most beloved characters in the franchise, and although I think her character lacks in the later seasons of the show, I think one of the most interesting things they did with her in the last season was making her go and explore what is west of Westeros, as that is a question I have always pondered, and I'd love to see the answers to that myself someday. Brandon Stark, who mostly just goes by Bran, is the second youngest son of Lord Eddard and Lady Catelyn, and he is often accompanied by his direwolf, Summer, with whom he shares a very strong word connection with. He was born at Winterfell at the height of the summer, and he is named after his late uncle Brandon. At the beginning of the books, he is only 7 years old, and he favors his mother's side in appearance. He is a sweet and thoughtful boy, beloved by pretty much everyone at Winterfell, and he has a fascination with climbing and exploring the castle. Like his siblings, he is also dutiful and tough-minded, but he also possesses an interest in adventure and is often very excited. He has a deep desire to see far-off places one day, and dreams of becoming a knight. His half-brother Jon fondly thinks of Bran as being stubborn and curious, and although very young, he always wanted to join the older boys in whatever it is they were doing. Bran also loves hearing old Nan's stories, preferring the scary ones above all else, especially ones that discuss the children of the forest, the Long Night, and the White Walkers. He is also very interested in tales about knights and the Kingsguard, and he asks to hear the same stories over and over again. Of course, Bran is thrown out of a window by Jaime Lannister at the beginning of the story, resulting in him becoming crippled and never being able to walk again. But due to the ability he has, which is being known as a skin changer, he can explore the world through animals. In the books, Bran is a much more prominent character, and the storyline of him becoming the Three-Eyed Raven is explored in greater depth, which is very unfortunate, as I always thought this was one of the most interesting aspects of the story. The final member of House Stark that I will discuss in this video, Rickon, who is the youngest son of Lord Eddard and Lady Catelyn, is naturally aggressive and strong-willed, and he is usually accompanied by his direwolf, Shaggy Dog. He was born in Winterfell, and at the start of the books, he is only 3 years old, favoring his mother in appearance. The show fails to truly capture his personality, as in the books, he is very playful and laughs often, but is also stubborn and fiercely tries to be like his older brothers. He's described as being a wild child, which seems to be a common trait amongst the Starks, and he is quite similar to Arya in this way. After his parents left Winterfell and never returned, this messed with his child mind heavily, and a lot of the events are way more traumatic for him in the books, especially because he is so much younger. Rickon also has similar dreams to Bran, with him even having the same dream about Ned in the crypts after Ned's death. At the current point in the books, Rickon is the only known living heir to House Stark, and it seems like he will have a much larger role in the next books, especially when compared to what happened with this character in the TV series, in which he was written off in a pretty disappointing way. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like. Let me know which of the Starks I talked about are your favorite, and if you want to see more Game of Thrones videos like this, be sure to check out the others on my channel, and also make sure to subscribe, as I plan on continuing to make more. Anyways, thank you again, and goodbye.